Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And this is what happens when you find
Chauvis!
when you find a stranger in the Alps. Wow.
Chauvis!
Yes. That indeed. All right, welcome to Vintage Cinema Rewind, everybody, and we're talking about one of my all-time favorite movies.
And one of my all-time favorite movies.
Exactly, The Big Lebowski.
Neither of us out of our element here, are we, Donnie?
We're very much in our element, yes. So it's funny, as per usual, we have this group chat that I will occasionally pop my head in, and Blake messaged me saying, we're going to do a comedy next, and I said, okay, and then you sent me a list of options, and instantly my eyes fixed on one of such options, The Big Lebowski.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, we're doing that.
Yeah.
And here we are. We're doing it.
Yeah, no, this is probably the movie that I've been talking about doing since the inception of this podcast. It's my favorite comedy of all time. Probably not a surprise to a lot of people.
No, definitely not. I feel like we've dropped lines from this movie. Like, we've sprinkled lines from this movie throughout the podcast over the years.
Oh,
too.
absolutely,
yeah.
we have. Yeah.
I do it in my own daily life, too.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
It's probably like one of the more quotable movies that I quote on a regular basis.
Yeah. I have the quotes page on IMDb pulled up right now because, you know, we were looking for a quote to start the episode, which you ruined, by the way. And then just look at our, I think
we'll talk about that when we get into the deep dive about that, because I have thoughts on what I did too, but
okay. So yeah, no, I think we both had the quotes page pulled up and we just spent 5 minutes circling through it,
just reading quotes.
Yeah, this is definitely probably the most quotable movie for me of all time.
I agree. Like, it's really interesting because The Big Lebowski movie from 1998, and also, as a side note, this is our primer episode, so we're not going to get into spoilers in this episode. This is kind of a who should go check this one out kind of thing.
Spoiler alert, you all should.
Yeah.
Everybody should.
I very much agree. You know, like, just reading through all of the quotes, like, everything's just so entertaining, and, like, for a movie that's not about a whole lot, like, every quote just, like, bites really hard.
I don't know that I'd agree that this isn't a movie about a whole lot. I just think, like, our main characters don't know a whole lot about what's going on.
Right.
It's almost like this is a mystery and we're following the world's least competent detective.
Yes.
And his weird friend.
It's wild. I can't believe this movie's already, like, 26 years old, but I guess you know, the big 25 year was last year, which we missed, but
oh wow,
we're doing it now.
Hey, I guess 26 is a good year too.
Yeah,
26 is the year that my ADHD destroyed my long-term memory, so you know, 26, it can be a milestone. I don't know, I haven't been formally diagnosed. Let's just move on.
Do we want to talk plot to start off with then?
Yes, I would love to, actually.
Before you even talk plot, I'm actually excited to see how you're going to frame this movie, because there's really, like, one framing device for the entirety of the movie, and it's so absurd that, like, I want to hear how you're going to pitch it to somebody to actually go and check this one out.
I'm actually curious how I'm going to pitch this movie, because I actually, let me just say, this movie is in my top 3.
Yeah, this is my top 5.
Yeah, it goes The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Casablanca, and then The Big Lebowski comes in clutch for the bronze medal.
Nice.
Of my like cinema pantheon, right?
Yeah.
At the same time, I haven't seen this movie in maybe, oh shit, I think it's been like 9 years. I haven't watched it front to back, beginning to end in 9 years. Actually, the last time I watched it is when I made my poor parents watch it with me. They had opinions, but at the same time, like, I saw this movie in film school, and then I saw it a few more times throughout my early to mid-20s. But, like, having not seen it in a while, I was kind of like, how would you pitch this movie?
Yeah.
Like, how would you even describe this movie to someone? Right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, I'm going to do my best. So, way out west, there's this fella. You know, sometimes there's a man for his time and place, and that is Jeff Lebowski, also known as the Dude.
Pretty much only known as the Dude.
Right, or El Duderino if you're not into brevity. Yeah, he's basically just like this aging, unemployed bachelor. He's a semi-professional golfer. He's best friends with Steve Buscemi and a very, very angry John Goodman. And yeah, he's just kind of this, I don't want to say loser because he's pretty harmless, but he's just kind of this guy who
ebbs and flows. Like life ebbs and flows through him.
Yeah, he's just this kind of aging stoner who one day some thugs break into his apartment demanding money because they've confused him with another Jeff Lebowski, a weird eccentric millionaire on the other side of town. And on the way out, one of them pisses on his rug, and the dude decides to get compensated by the other Jeff Lebowski for this case of mistaken identity. And then things just kind of dovetail from there. The other Jeff Lebowski, the like titular Big Lebowski, is this very rich, very angry, very successful man who instantly dislikes the dude, but he's got a young trophy wife. And very early on, the trophy wife, Bunny, gets kidnapped, and they decide they want the dude to be the bagman. They want him to be the courier to hand off the ransom money.
Right.
And their rationale for this is, because the dude is pretty quick to be like, well, why me? And their rationale is, well, you've encountered these thugs before, so you should be able to identify them, right?
Right.
And then things just kind of dovetail and swerve and go off from there.
And we get to meet all of these crazy characters.
Yeah, all these strange experiences and this very weird, very labyrinthine plot that the dude is only ever tangentially aware of at any given moment. Yeah.
He's always like 2 steps behind, right?
He's like the opposite of like a film noir detective. It's almost like it's a film noir story with like a 90s slacker main character bumbling his way through it.
Right.
Honestly, I'm proud. That's a pretty coherent way of describing this story, but
yeah, you went even into more detail than like I would have gone into.
Even than the movie goes into sometimes. So yeah, that's where we are. But I guess that's a good way of saying it. This is more I almost see this movie more as like a series of vignettes than an actual coherent beginning, middle, end story.
And it's funny because while you're watching and experiencing it, that's what it feels like. But really, like when you really start to think about how this movie is written and how tightly everything is designed, the more and more that you see this movie and the more and more that you experience and think about it, the more everything just becomes so much more clear how professionally made this film is.
Yeah, and I don't want to be dismissive. Like, there is a compelling story going on. It's just, it's almost not even really the real focus of the movie.
No.
This is more, I remember reading Roger Ebert's review of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, where he said that Sergio Leone was more a director of scenes, right? Like, it's more about the scenes and, like, the individual scenes that all are interesting and stitched together than it is about the overall plot.
Right.
Right. It's a movie about moments.
Yes.
Moments.
Rather than payoffs.
Yeah, right.
Although there are plenty of payoffs, they just come not all at the end.
Right, and not in ways you would even really expect, right?
Right.
No spoilers, but the big mystery underlining everything is actually kind of underwhelming when you get there. And, like, that's not a diss on the movie. I think that's very much by design.
Yes.
You know?
Yep.
So
characters and people you may know. The dude, played by Jeff Bridges, one of my favorite performances of all time. I think that this is likely Jeff Bridges' most notable performance, although I am a big fan of Jeff Bridges. He also stars in there's this show that's out right now called The Old Man, which I've been meaning to go check out. I think it's like a Western.
okay.
So that's like what he's working on right now. I think there are 7 episodes in by the looks of it, but I'm pretty sure it's getting a 2nd season. But he also of recent was in True Grit, the remake of that. He's kind of been doing some other films like Hell or High Water.
I feel like he's one of these actors who kind of he'll show up in strange places, and you're always happy he's there.
Yeah,
but I feel like he's an actor you kind of lose sight of for a while.
Yeah, he's like both got like a leading man kind of charm to him, but also like this laid back nature that doesn't always make him like stand out as like, oh my god, there's Jeff Bridges.
Yeah, right?
Like I remember seeing the original Iron Man years ago and
Yeah,
never
I was going to bring that up.
Yeah, putting him together as Obadiah Stane in that movie.
Yeah, you're like, oh, right, you were the bad guy that one time.
Yeah. It's probably partially the hair, right?
Yeah, he was bald in that one, and he's got a glorious head of hair in this one.
I think that like his long hair is probably what like 80% of people under the age of about 50 are just who have long hair are probably going for, honestly.
Right. Anyone who grows out their hair, this is what they're aiming for, and none of them are succeeding.
Correct.
As someone who formerly had long hair, I can attest to that.
As someone who formerly had long hair, also would agree that if somebody had asked me, what are you going for? I would have said Jeff Bridges.
The dude, yeah. I was going more for Loki, but same ballpark.
So you mentioned already his friends, John Goodman as Walter Sobchak. This is also like my favorite John Goodman performance.
Oh, yeah. I mean, this is like, yeah.
That's saying something too, because John Goodman is low-key top 5 favorite actors probably of all time for me.
He's a fantastic actor. Like, he's a true professional.
He's also just like a really nice guy. You know, like every interview I'm like, damn, like he just kind of has this like aura of like grandfatherism, I think.
Big jolly guy.
Yeah. Of recent, like Jess and I just finished up the latest season of The Righteous Gemstones, where he plays like the patriarch of the family, and he's fantastic in that. John Goodman's been around for forever, and I feel like every 5 years he has a movie that I'm like, that was incredible.
Yeah.
Like the last big movie that I really, really love that honestly would maybe even grace my top 100, and if not, it would be just outside of it, would be 10 Cloverfield Lane.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up.
But, you know, like he goes back to my childhood. He was in like the Flintstones movies, which, you know, I'm sure don't hold up, but are like fan favorites.
He was in Roseanne.
Yep.
Both of them, the reboot and the OG.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's also a frequent collaborator with the Coen Brothers, who we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. The directors of this, he's been in a ton of their stuff. Yeah, no, John Goodman is just like somebody who is very busy in Hollywood and has always been very busy in Hollywood, and I would stop just short of saying he's a main draw, but for me, like, I generally speaking will go and check his stuff out.
Yeah, I mean, he's definitely an A-lister. Like, if you know John Goodman's in it, you're like, oh, okay, like, I'll watch this.
Yeah.
I remember he was in The Monuments Men.
Yeah.
A phenomenally boring movie from 10 years ago, but he was great in it. I remember, if we could talk about The Monuments Men for a second, I remember watching that in theaters with my old roommate, just being like, how is this movie so boring? How are there this many talented people on screen, and it's so fucking boring?
I have never seen that movie.
Well, don't. It's
I wasn't planning on it.
Not worth your time. Anyways, back to the Big Lebowski.
And then rounding up the group of the bowlers is Steve Buscemi playing Donnie. This is maybe also my favorite Donnie or Steve
Buscemi performance.
Yeah. It's such a like non-performance. Like it's just such a small but like memorable performance as this like bumbling, half-aware, almost professional bowler. He was just like kind of always not really in the conversation at any given time.
Yeah, there's this great running gag about how whenever like the dude or Walter are talking about the plot, Donnie is just kind of at the edge of the conversation.
Yeah.
He'll be like, wait, what's going on? He'll be like, shut the fuck up, Donnie.
Some of the best quotes in the entire movie are just like insults directed towards Donnie.
Yeah, like the world does not, you're like a child who wandered into the middle of the movie. The world does not stop and start at your convenience.
Yeah, it's fantastic because half of the performance, half of what you remember is actually just the insults directed at him.
Yeah, I know.
But Steve Buscemi is still one of my favorite actors of all time. Like,
this really, actually, watching this movie again in preparation for this, he was almost my favorite character of the whole movie.
Yeah.
Because, like, in the same way that the dude really is only tangentially aware what's going on in the plot, like, Donnie's even further removed from what's going on.
Right.
Like, he's barely even a character.
Yeah.
Like, he's just kind of there.
And that's the other thing that I'll say, like, kind of going off of that too, like, and we've kind of said this about the last 3 actors, but this is probably like one of my all-time favorite stars in a movies. Like, this has every performance in this movie, and there's a lot of people that we're gonna have to get through, so I'm gonna start getting a little bit quicker on this, but every single one of these performances are like all-time performances from me, and it's just like such an all-star cast of people from the 90s.
Can I also just say the other thing I appreciate about this movie, watching it again in preparation for this, is just the casting on the whole, right? Like even the bit parts, or like the characters who just, they show up for one scene, or they're there but they're not saying anything. Like the casting director for this movie deserves an Oscar.
Yeah.
Like just like even like there's this scene where the dude is talking to two cops, and it's like this really unimpressed looking black cop and this very kind of dorky looking white cop. And even they are perfect, right? Mm-hmm. Their line reads are perfect. Yeah, I could go on, but like this is a movie where like everybody is perfectly cast.
Yeah, I don't think that's actually something that is actually recent. I think starting next year, there's going to be an Oscar for Best Casting.
Well, shit. I think William Goldman, one of my favorite writers, famously said that like 90% of filmmaking is just casting, getting the right people for the right roles.
Yeah, and like you said, it's kind of flawless in that regard. I guess I'll just quickly mention too, Steve Buscemi, also in some of my other favorite movies like Reservoir Dogs, Fargo, another Coen Brothers movie. He's also a frequent Coen Brothers collaborator. He just appears in things, and every one of those appearances is instantly memorable. And then after that, we have the Big Lebowski, Jeffrey Lebowski, played by David Huddleston, who I don't think contemporary audiences are going to know from a whole lot, but it's a very loud, outlandish performance from him. But he was in some like older cool stuff like Blazing Saddles, right?
Okay.
Playing his underling, Philip Seymour Hoffman as Brant, also one of those like, I can't believe this performance exists because it's incredible.
Oh God,
we're gonna talk about Brant in a lot of detail, I think, when we get into the deep dive.
Okay, Steve Buscemi. It's funny that like after coming back to this movie after all these years, it's Steve Buscemi and Philip Seymour Hoffman that I couldn't take my eyes off of.
Yeah, like Philip Seymour Hoffman. It's funny because like I think a lot of movie critics and like people who are in the know with movies are always like, Philip Seymour Hoffman is one of the greatest character actors of movies ever. And it's funny because the more I see of him, the more I tend to agree with that.
Yeah, he actually he was in this great movie from like 10 years ago that I just watched last year. I'm actually surprised it didn't make it onto my top 5. The Master.
Oh yeah. Yep.
Yeah, with him and Joaquin Phoenix. And like, yeah, that's another one of those performances where I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck?
He just kind of loses himself in the performance, right? Like, you don't... You're like, oh, there's Philip Seymour Hoffman, but you never really think about that while you're watching it. You're just like, oh, there's Brant doing Brant things.
There's Brant doing Brant things. That's a good way of putting it.
And then Tara Reid, who's like the bombshell of the 90s, playing Bunny Lebowski, where a lot of the plot in the second and third act is centered around. This is a hilarious performance. This is probably... So Tara Reid's funny because she was like the it girl of the 90s and then kind of maybe faded a little bit more into obscurity.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about her, to be honest.
Yeah, she was in like American Pie and this and a few other things around that time. But this is kind of like the perfect role for her.
Yeah. Is it? I'm gonna have to defer to you to this one.
Yeah, I think this is the perfect Tara Reid performance. And then we have, after these are kind of like the central characters that a lot of the plot is revolved around. But then after that, we just have like this all-star cast of like other people making appearances. Like Julianne Moore's Maud Lebowski is hilarious.
Vagina.
Yes.
Johnson.
John Turturro as Jesus, probably like the all-time #1 greatest 2 minutes in a movie ever.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. Carmine Falcone from the new Batman movie plays this character. These are the same guy.
Yeah.
You don't fuck with the Jesus.
Yes, we'll talk about that when we get to it. Sam Elliott playing the stranger, the narrator of the film. This is like my favorite of his performances. He's utilized extraordinarily well in this one.
Do you have to use so many cuss words?
I always forget that David Thewlis is in this.
Oh, who's that again?
He's the guy who plays Professor Lupin in the Harry Potter series. He's the Shame Wizard in that TV show Big Mouth.
Yeah.
He was in the third season of Fargo. He has like this dry British accent, and I always forget he's in this movie. And then he like appears as the pencil stashed man in Maud's apartment.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's so many characters that we're going to be talking about in the deep dive here. I've got a few more. Ben Gazzara as Jackie Treehorn. We've already talked about this year because he was in the original Roadhouse. He just comes like perfect slimeball actor.
Got the right look for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sorry, man.
And then the only other three people that I'm going to mention are the Nihilists. Peter Stormare, fantastic in everything that he's in.
Yep.
And one of the Nihilists is Flea.
From
Super
the Red Hot
cool.
Chili Peppers.
Yeah, exactly.
I just figured that out just now.
I kind of forgot that he was in this, honestly.
Yeah.
So what more do I say? Like, this is one of the greatest casting films ever. So
yeah, I mean that's kind of what the Coen Brothers are famous for being able to like get their hands on these legendary actors.
Yeah, I mean, if it were me, if I was able to like appear in a Coen Brother film, like I would drop absolutely everything for that as well.
Yeah, for sure. I would quit my job, break up with my partner, move across the country, whatever you want.
Yeah. So we talked about the Coen Brothers already, but Joel and Ethan Coen are two brothers who collaborate on many of their films together, and this one is no exception. They wrote, directed, produced, and co-edited this film.
Wow.
So their hands are all over this. This is an independent film, which is really cool that they were able to even raise $15 million. But at the same time, when you have this cast involved in this movie, I gotta imagine it would have been relatively easy to get the funding for this. Although they did struggle a little bit because on paper, I'm sure that this movie reads really bizarre.
Yeah, it's even like when I had to explain this movie, I'm like how I can't imagine having to like sit in front of like a cigar chomping Harvey Weinstein type and be like, so this is my movie.
Yeah.
Like, here's what I want.
Well, yeah, and like that's really how movies are made, right? Is like the sales pitch of them essentially. So
yeah,
this is a tough sell without having seen the movie a little bit because it's so episodic and all over the place, and you have to have the performances that you have in this movie for it to work.
Yeah, really. Shit, I mean, it's like William Goldman said, it's 90% casting.
Yeah.
Can you imagine anyone else in any of these roles?
No.
Like,
there's a long list of casting choices for the dude. He was like the last one to be cast in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them would have just brought like such different performances to this movie that like it would have been a different movie if anybody except for these particular actors were in these particular roles.
Yeah, I know, right? It's kind of like I'm working on a new book right now, plug, and one of the things I always struggle with is finding the right name for the right character.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those things where like the wrong name can kind of just completely derail a character. But once you find the right name, it's like, oh, okay, right. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of the same thing with casting and characters and actors, right? It's gotta be like a match made in heaven.
Yeah. So the Coen Brothers are people who have been around since the 80s, but have just been churning out like one movie every 3 to 5 years since then. They've been frequently collaborating for that time, but each of them does have a couple movies that they've done separately.
Okay.
But the movies that you're going to know from them from most recent are like No Country for Old Men, which is almost coming up on 20 years, which is wild. And True Grit, the remake of that. And then in 2018, their most recent together was The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which is a movie that I really, really enjoy. It's just a tale of short stories. Have you seen that one?
No, I haven't even heard of it.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm shocked. It's a
Western, right?
Yeah, that has just a bunch of short stories. Oh, I have a lot of fun with that movie.
Oh, maybe I should check it out.
You should.
I kind of lost sight of them after True Grit, so I have quite a few of their movies to catch up on.
So yeah, and that's actually something that I was going to talk more about in the deep dive about, like each of our relationships to the Coen Brothers, because I put the Coen Brothers as top 5 directors of the 21st century, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Although some of my favorites of theirs are like in the 90s, but No Country for Old Men is an absolute masterpiece.
Oh, yeah. I rewatched No Country for Old Men a few years ago, and I was like, yeah, this is great. This is amazing.
I watch it like once every 3 years, I would say. I watched it within the last 6 months.
That's one of those movies where I saw it in theaters when I was like 14, and I just didn't fucking get it.
Mm-hmm.
I came back to it a few years later, and I was like, oh my god,
Yeah.
oh
Yeah, that's a
So-
movie that you have to experience a little bit older to really fully understand.
yeah. 14 was too young for that movie. I was just like, what's going on? But
Yeah.
then, yeah, coming back to it at like 19 or 20, I was like, oh shit, things are different now.
Yeah,
I think that movie gave me my first gray hairs.
fair enough.
And then I also love Fargo. Fargo's
Yes.
one of my I'm looking at their list of movies right now, and I have kind of a I need to go on a Coen Brothers kick.
I do as well, and this might be the start of that because Jess and I, within last year, have watched Fargo, Big Lebowski, we've watched No Country for Old Men. I watched Burn After Reading like 2 weeks ago. So I honestly, I watch at least one Coen Brothers movie a year, I would say.
They have a very specific tone, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's like comedic, but in a very dark way.
I would almost compare it to Quentin Tarantino, but now actually I wouldn't. I withdraw that statement. It's very, it's a little bit quirky, but it's dark and weird and unsettling at the same time.
Yeah, because
You know?
a lot of their stuff feels grounded in a world that doesn't feel too far away from our own. Like all of these characters are insane, but they all feel lived in and real.
Yeah, right? Like, and then the comedic moments that come in, you're just like, oh, okay. Like,
Yeah.
sometimes, yeah. There's some great comedic moments in this movie. But even
Yes.
some of them, just, they kind of throw you on your ass.
Yeah. It's funny because I've seen this movie like no joke, at least 50 times, I would guess. There was times when I would watch this movie like 2-3 times a year in my
Nice.
early 20s. I've seen this probably 50 times. And it's funny because this is maybe one of the only comedy movies that still makes me laugh out loud, like gut-bustingly laugh out loud at certain moments.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned before on the podcast that, like, I don't really. It's funny, I laugh a lot in daily life, but when I'm watching movies, especially by myself, I'm often like, it's almost like I'm analyzing an equation. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, yes, good. I see what you did there. This movie did draw some like laughs out of me last night,
Yeah.
which is hard to do.
So who is this movie for, and does it hold up to a modern watch?
Yes, absolutely to the second one. Although I will say, again, having not seen this movie in like 9 years, a lot of the charm of this movie is like, oh, look at the car phone. That's
Yeah.
cute. Or like looking at the old cars, like, oh yeah, this really was the 90s. But
Well, it's funny too because it's a movie that was made in 1998 but set in 1991. So there's like a
Yeah.
built-in nostalgia within the movie itself.
it'd be like if you wrote a movie, if I wrote a book now in 2024 that was set in like 2018.
Yeah.
You'd be like, oh yeah, remember Bohemian Rhapsody? That was fun.
I agree with you. Like this movie holds up incredibly well. It's a movie that this is a staple in cinema. Like it is, as we'll talk about, has like a really storied legacy. It almost feels like a rite of passage movie in a sense. Like this is a movie that I think that, like you said at the beginning, just about anybody, like 99% of the population is going to love this movie.
I
or
do
at least
think
like this movie.
There are people who are going to bounce off this movie, though, just because its tone is so unique. Like,
Mhm.
I showed this movie to my poor parents like 9 years ago when I was still living with them, and they were just kind of like, okay, yeah. I was actually on the phone with my mom last night, and I'm like, I'm recording with Blake tomorrow. She's like, oh, what movie are you doing? And I went, The Big Lebowski, and there was a pause on the other end of the phone, and she just went, okay. Have fun. So she remembered.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, this is fucking obnoxious, but there was this girl I went to university with who I was trying to impress because I had a crush on her, and I explained to her how brilliant this movie really was because she thought it was just a dumb stoner comedy.
Right.
She wasn't impressed, and she did not go out with me afterwards. But
Because at the end of the day, it is kind of a dumb stoner comedy. But
Yeah, yeah.
It's the smartest dumb stoner comedy ever made.
And you know what? I've often like held up the Coen Brothers for like something I want to achieve in my own work, or like my own ethos that comes to my own creative work is like, you know, if you want to have a really compelling point, fine, but like you need to entertain me first.
Right.
That's something I strive to do in my own work.
Well, and I think the other thing about this is that they have such like a unique like signature on all of their works. Like
Yes.
you can tell pretty quickly a Coen Brothers production.
Yeah, for sure.
Um,
Like a aging stoner almost setting his crotch on fire while trying to avoid the guy tailing him and then crashing.
Yeah.
That's a Coen Brothers movie.
Yeah.
Oh, and spilling beer on his crotch to put out the flames while driving. Yeah.
It's awesome. But yeah, no, like this is genuinely speaking, like I think this movie is kind of a rite of passage. Like I think this is one that your parents aren't probably going to show you growing up, and then you'll find it like if you're somebody who's getting into movies or have just recently gone to movies or something like I did, like I kind of found this around 16, 17 when I was really getting into all of this, and it quickly became one of my favorite movies. Like I think it's it's a classic for guys, I would say, but
this is definitely a movie that probably appeals more to men.
Yeah. And part of it's just because it's kind of like a guy hangout movie too, right? Like a lot of this movie is just the dude hanging out with his buddies or the dude hanging out with other people.
I will say it's kind of funny, like their relationship is very much like, it's so we've got Walter, the Vietnam vet who's been divorced for 5 years. And then we've got the dude who there's no relationship history to speak of with him. Mm-hmm. It's almost like him and Walter are just kind of like, you see this sometimes with older men, right? It's like something just didn't work out in their lives and they're sort of married to each other now.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Well, they're men who are passionate about their hobbies too, right? Like
also that, yeah.
So like I think that if you had set this movie as two golfing buddies, I think that this movie probably works. Like the reason why they picked bowling, we could maybe talk about in the deep dive episode, but that's kind of part of the other appeal to this is like the way you put it, it's really sad. But I think that these are two men who are very comfortable with where they are at in their lives, right?
You're right. I had to go glass half empty with this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As we talk about things in the deep dive more, I think there is something a little bit commemorable about, having a hobby and being passionate about something in your life.
And having a circle and having friends.
Yeah.
A lot of men in particular don't have friends.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
So
you know what? You're right. I stand these two older men in a vaguely homoerotic relationship.
Well, if they're in a homoerotic relationship, I guess that you just have to say that about all of my friendships then.
Yeah, and us too. I mean, look at weird. This podcast is really more of an eccentric hobby.
Yeah. One scene to sell the movie, I really stuck on this one, which is funny because this is such an episodic film that like really any scene is kind of on its own in a bubble, very entertaining.
Right, yeah.
I don't know if you have one that you're set on yet.
I picked mine pretty quickly, actually.
Okay, go for it.
It's the second clip on Movieclips. I think it's called They Peed on Your Rug.
He peed on my rug.
He peed on my rug. And it's just that first bowling scene where we meet the dude's friends, Donnie, Walter. They're having this big argument about, like, Walter's the one saying you should go to, like, the real Lebowski and get compensated for your rug being peed on.
Right.
Also, the first instance of, like, probably the most famous line in the whole movie, that rug really tied the room together.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then our first meeting of Donnie being confused and being told to shut the fuck up. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say that as chaotic as this movie is, it really hinges on the dude and Walter's relationship. And this is where we meet it. We see it flowering for the first time.
Yeah. And who knows, like, the movie doesn't explore like their past history or anything, or like how much time these guys spend outside of bowling together. But
it's almost like Walter is kind of like just feeding the dude bad decisions. Or maybe like, so the dude is very laid back and probably stoned out of his mind most of the time.
Yeah.
Whereas Walter is very indignant and very angry. So it's almost like, in a lot of ways, Walter is kind of the one driving the plot.
Right.
Or like he hijacks the plot and he pushes the dude into doing things he wouldn't ordinarily do.
Right.
Right? And I guess maybe when you're writing a character as lazy as the dude, you need to give him a supporting cast like that to make the plot happen.
Yeah, for sure. That's a good point, actually. I think that this is probably the one that I'm leaning towards as well as like my scene to sell the movie. It's the first one that I wrote down. The only other one that I would say I would also maybe pitch is Nobody F's with Jesus.
Yeah, that too.
I think for the exact same reasons that you mentioned, like it's focused on the relationship of the dude and Walter and then Donnie in the background. Yeah, like it's a scene that it's captivating because it has one of the craziest performances in the entire movie.
Right.
And it doesn't give away the plot and anything else in too much detail. But again, it highlights the relationship of the hangout, the three guys together, and how the world kind of moves around them.
Can I just say, I was talking about how perfect the casting in this movie is. One of my favorite characters in the movie is Jesus's best friend, Liam.
Yes.
So you've got Jesus, John Turturro, in like this big, like it's almost like a full body pantsuit.
Yes.
And he's got like one painted nail.
Yes.
Like
Coke nail.
A Coke nail, yeah. And he's saying all this outlandish shit like, you don't fuck with Jesus. And then his partner is this guy named Liam who has no lines in the movie. He's just this kind of overweight, dorky looking middle-aged man.
Well, I'm pretty sure he's like a professional bowler, actually. Like, I think he's the professional bowler that they had on set. And so that's how he's involved in all of this, right?
Yeah, no, it's just the contrast between a character as flamboyant as Jesus and just this like very dorky looking middle-aged man is just really, really funny to me.
I am sure that bowling leagues in like after the 50s and maybe even 60s started having these kind of wild, outlandish characters more involved with them.
I'm sure they did too. And again, just the contrast between those two characters, I'm like, this is really funny.
Yeah.
Like if you had Jesus on scene by himself, I'm like, this would be really funny. But then just placing like kind of a
very average
very normal looking guy right next to him is just really, really funny to me.
Agreed.
I'm like, we've hit 11 on the comedy scale.
Yeah. So when to watch? I think that this movie could be watched literally anytime. And I say that because I will watch this movie literally anytime. This is a movie that, and I'm already going to get into where to watch, like this movie is streaming on Netflix. This is a movie that I will scroll through Netflix. It'll pop up as I'm scrolling. I'll chuckle to myself and go, yeah, all right, it's probably time again.
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah. This is this is essentially my comfort movie.
I would agree. I actually watched this movie. I had to work at my other job last night. So I watched this movie yesterday afternoon alone in my apartment. I had a really good time. It was like 2 p.m. on a Saturday, and I was like, nice.
There are very few movies that make me as happy as this one does.
It really is a cheer you up kind of movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Actually, I watched the first hour and a half, then I had to go to work, and then I had to come home, and I was a little depressed, coming home by myself on a Saturday night. I watched the rest of this movie, and I was like, ha ha ha, yes.
Did it.
Yeah. I went to bed in a really good mood after that.
That's awesome. That's kind of the thing is like it's a feel-good movie. The outro is perfect with Sam Elliott's character kind of summarizing everything. So
I liked parts of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just a great movie. Like, and I think that coming from you and I, who are both people who generally like movies that are a little bit more challenging sometimes, honestly, this one's like, for both of us to be in agreement that this is our feel-good movie is pretty neat.
Well, you know what? This movie is actually, we'll talk about this more next week, but there is, if you want to dissect this movie, there is a lot going on.
Oh, yeah.
Even in that first scene, which again, we'll talk about next week, I was kind of like, oh, okay, interesting, right? Yeah. Like behind the veneer of this stoner comedy and Jesus exposing himself to 8-year-olds and...
8-year-old dude.
Yeah. Like all these great lines. I'm like, there's stuff going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like there's stuff going on.
Yeah.
Is all I'll say.
Okay. I think that is as much as we can talk about without spoiling this movie for the 6 people who haven't seen it or everyone who's under 18 who hasn't seen this one yet.
They should all be ashamed of themselves. Frankly, if you're under 18, you should just be ashamed of yourself.
I promise you that.
Yeah, me too.
But that's it, I think, for the primary episode. So we will see you next week when we do our deep dive on some of our favorite movies of all time. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
Me too. Don't roll on Shabbos.
Yeah.
Cool.